time heals all wounds. That's what everyone tells you. But if that were true, why does grief sometimes hit harder at year 2 than year 1? The Buddha never promised that pain fades with time. Instead, he taught something far more radical, that grief itself carries a message, not a wound to recover from, but a teacher arriving uninvited. Today I want to share what that teaching actually sounds like, because it changed how I understand loss entirely. It was a summer afternoon in ancient India. The earth was pale and dry, the air thick with shimmering heat. People pressed into the shade of trees. Oxen stood with half-closed eyes, perfectly still. And then, moving through that quiet afternoon street, a woman was running. Her hair was undone, her feet were bare. She clutched something tightly to her chest and just ran without stopping. People turned away when they saw her. No one spoke to her. That woman has lost her mind. Voices whispered here and there, drifting through the heat. At the edge of town, the Buddha sat with his disciples beneath the trees. The wind moved through the branches. A bird called from somewhere far off. It was a peaceful afternoon, and that is where she finally arrived. She fell to her knees before him, her chest heaving, and held out what she had been carrying, a small child, her son, cold and still since morning. "Please," she said, "you are said to have great power. Bring him back to me." The Buddha did not look away from the child, and he did not look away from her. "I will help you," he said at last. "But first, go into the town and bring me a mustard seed, just one, from any household that has never known death." She rose immediately, her eyes bright for the first time, and ran back the way she had come. Her name was Kisagotami. She had married young, and the little boy she'd finally been given, her only child, had become the whole light of her life. In her husband's household she was poor, and her mother-in-law treated her coldly. That child was the one thing that kept her standing. And then, without warning, while he was still so small, the boy fell suddenly ill and stopped breathing. She couldn't believe it. Yesterday he had been laughing. Today he was still. As she held his small, cooling body, something inside her gave way. He's only sleeping. He'll wake up. He has to wake up. That was the only thought that kept her on her feet. She carried him through the streets, searching for a doctor. Every doctor she found shook his head. This child is already gone. Each time she heard those words, she covered her ears and walked on to find the next one. And so, at last, she came to the Buddha. "Please, bring my son back. I know you can do it. Please, please." She fell to her knees and held out her cold, silent child. Her words broke apart through her tears. Her shoulders shook. The Buddha looked at her, not with pity, not with distance, but with a quiet, steady stillness, as though he were simply receiving the full weight of her suffering. After a long silence, he spoke. "I will make medicine for your son." Her eyes flickered just for a moment, with something like hope. "But I need one thing. Bring me mustard seeds. Only, they must come from a house that has never known death." Mustard seeds were common. Every household had them. Her heart lifted and she was on her feet and running back into the town before he had finished speaking. She knocked on the first door. "Could you spare some mustard seeds?" The family was glad to help, until she added, "But they must come from a house that has never lost anyone." The neighbor's face fell. "Then I'm afraid we can't. We lost my father last year." The next house, the one after that, and the next. 3 years ago, my grandmother. Last month, my husband. A baby, just after it was born. Every house had its parting. Every house had known death. As the light began to soften toward evening, she stopped in front of an old house at the far edge of town. Her legs would carry her no further. She looked down at the child still held against her chest. Somewhere in all that walking, without quite knowing when, she had understood. There is no house that has not lost someone. Every door I knocked on, someone behind it had wept. Tears ran down her face, but they were not the same tears as that morning's cry. She laid her son gently on the ground, pressed her palms together, and turned back toward the Buddha. This time she did not run. "Did you find the mustard seeds?" She shook her head slowly. There was no such house. Every home I visited had known death. I thought I was the only one. Her voice caught. The Buddha nodded, quietly. Today you walked to many doors, and in each one you touched a grief not your own. And in doing so, didn't your own grief begin, ever so slightly, to take on a different color? She stood there for a moment, not answering, because she was remembering the old woman at the 7th house, who had pressed her hand and said nothing, and how that silence had felt, strangely, like company. The Buddha gave her no medicine. He did not bring the child back to life, and yet she never left his side. Why? Because something had shifted during that one day of walking. The grief itself had not changed. The fact of what she had lost had not changed. And yet something real was different. This is where Buddhism asks one of its most important questions. Where does suffering actually come from? When she was running through the streets that morning, it wasn't only the loss of her child that was tearing her apart. It was the layer underneath. This cannot be happening. This should not be. This must not be. Her mind clinging with everything it had, refusing to let reality be what it was. Suffering doesn't come simply from painful things happening. It comes from the mind saying this should not have happened, and fighting the truth of what is. The grief of losing someone you love is real. No one can take that pain from you, or should. But suffering deepens, piles layer upon layer, when resistance is added on top. Why me? Why this? Why now? The Buddha understood this, so instead of offering medicine, he sent her out to knock on doors, one by one. And what was behind every door? Death, loss, and people who had survived it, cooking their meals, scolding their children, laughing, living. There is no house without death didn't erase her grief, but it quietly dissolved something else, the crushing loneliness of believing she was suffering alone. Let me ask you something. Is your grief only yours? When we are in pain, it feels completely private. My suffering, no one else could understand. That is partly true, and partly an illusion. Grief is the proof of deep connection. You can only lose what you loved. You can only feel this kind of pain because something real existed between you, which means the deeper the grief, the deeper the love that came before it. And that love doesn't end. It lives in memory, in the body, in the way a certain slant of light still catches you off guard. Inside what you call my grief, the person you lost is still present. In Buddhism, everything arises within relationship. You exist because of the web of connections that formed you. The person who loved you helped create the version of you that loved them back. When that connection is severed, what remains is not nothing. What remains is the echo of everything that was. When we treat grief as something to be solved, something to finish and put away, we may unknowingly be trying to sever that echo, to be done with the person. Maybe grief doesn't need to be overcome. Maybe it needs to be understood for what it truly is, not as absence, as a different kind of presence. Kisa Gotami walked back to the Buddha empty-handed. No mustard seeds, no cure, and yet she carried something she hadn't brought with her that morning. Every door she had knocked on had opened, just a little, into another person's wound. She had entered 100 lives. 100 lives had entered hers. This is what the practice offers, not the end of grief, but the discovery that inside it, you are not alone, and perhaps never were. Kisa Gotami's story is set in ancient India. But the feeling of knocking on door after door and hearing, at every single one, we have known loss too. That reaches across every century into the lives we are living right now. How do we treat grief today? After losing someone dear, many of us feel the quiet pressure to get back to normal. The funeral passes, the bereavement leave ends, we return to work, return to the schedule, return to the rhythms that the world keeps moving in. Society asks us, gently but unmistakably, to recover. But the grief hasn't gone anywhere. It has simply been pressed down. Grief that cannot be spoken, cannot be cried, has nowhere to move, and so it changes shape. Waking at 3 a.m. for no reason, no appetite, a hollow feeling that nothing fills. These are not signs of weakness. They are grief, muffled, waiting for somewhere to go, and perhaps you've been there. A kind friend says, time heals everything, and you feel the warmth of their intention, and also somewhere small and quiet, a loneliness. because you know this isn't the kind of thing that time simply fixes. This is the kind of thing that lives in you. Buddhism would say, you're right to feel that. Grief is not a problem to solve. It is not a weakness to overcome. It is the lasting vibration of a real connection. And trying to silence it quickly is, in a way, trying to silence the person. So here is something worth pausing on. Where are you, right now, in your grief? When we are deep in sorrow, we often don't feel like a person who is grieving. We feel like grief itself. The boundary between us and the pain disappears, and that is when it becomes most overwhelming. But there is a subtle shift available. Not a cure, a shift. The grief is here, and so is the one who notices the grief. You are not only the sorrow, you are also the quiet presence that is aware of it. Grief is moving through me right now, rather than I am grief. It's a small difference in words. It can be a larger difference in how it feels to be inside your own life. For those carrying grief while also caring for children, or aging parents, or anyone who simply has no time to stop, your grief may have gone very deep and very quiet. It hasn't left. It's waiting, patiently, to be noticed. Noticing it, even for 2 minutes, may be the most important thing you do today. That, perhaps, is what the Buddha was offering Kisagotami when he sent her out into the streets. Not a cure, but a chance to finally, truly be seen. She did not return empty-handed because she had failed. She returned because every door had opened, and every face had looked back at her with recognition. And in that looking, something in her had quietly changed. The cure was not the mustard seed. The cure was the knocking. And maybe that is what we most need to offer one another. Not the careful words we rehearse before speaking, but simply the willingness to open the door. A neighbor who sits beside you without checking the time. A colleague who asks how you are, and then waits, actually waits for the real answer. These are not small gestures. They are the mustard seed, found at last. Just one small thing, if you're open to it. Not processing your grief, not overcoming it. Just this, giving it a name and letting it sit beside you. Here's how. Tonight, before you sleep, find just a few quiet minutes. You don't need to close your eyes. Simply place one hand on your chest and notice what's there. Then try gently to find a word for it. Lonely, angry, hollow, afraid, numb, a heaviness I can't name. Any word or no word at all. You don't have to get it right. Write it in a notebook if that helps. Say it out loud, or simply think it. What matters isn't the form, it's the act of turning toward what's there, instead of away from it. The disciples of the Buddha made a daily practice of simply observing their inner world. Not changing it, not fixing it, just looking. What is here right now? No judgment, no agenda. Just clear, gentle seeing. That practice requires no special skill, only a few quiet minutes. I won't tell you this will make the grief disappear. Feelings don't obey willpower. But the small habit of noticing, oh, you're still here today, can slowly change your relationship to what you carry. Not drowning in it, not fighting it, sitting beside it, the way you might sit beside an old friend who doesn't need you to say anything. And one more thing, if you feel ready. Think of one moment with the person you've lost. Not the loss itself. A moment before. What did their face look like? What did their voice sound like? Was there a smell in the air that day? A particular light? The person living in that memory has not vanished. They are there in the grief, at the very bottom of it, quiet and still present. You don't have to chase them. They haven't gone as far as you fear. Monks in the time of the Buddha would sometimes sit at the edge of the forest at dusk, not meditating, not reciting, simply watching the light change, letting what was leaving leave, letting what remained remain. That is all that is being asked of you tonight. Sit at your own edge, wherever that is, the corner of a room, the side of a bed, a chair by a window going dark. Let the light change around you too. What remains after everything else has gone quiet is not emptiness. It is the shape of what you loved. Just one question before we go. If you are grieving deeply right now, could it be that the depth of that grief is the measure of how fully you loved? And if that's true, is it possible to let your grief simply be here for a while, without rushing it toward the exit? Not forever, just for now. You don't need to answer today. There's no hurry. A woman once came to the Buddha carrying her dead child, begging for medicine to bring him back. He sent her to gather mustard seeds from a house untouched by death. She walked all day, knocking on every door in the village, and by evening she understood, not because anyone told her, but because the walking itself taught her. Sometimes the path through grief is the grief. She came back to the Buddha empty-handed, but she had stopped weeping. Not because the love was gone, but because the love had changed shape, and she had walked long enough to feel the difference. To understand what grief can reveal, it helps to first ask why suffering exists at all. We explored that question with an earlier teaching. You'll find a link in the description below. Kisa Gotami stayed. She went on to study and practice with the Buddha for the rest of her life. Her son never came back. The grief never fully disappeared. And she walked forward anyway. What is at the bottom of grief? The Buddha didn't answer that in words. He sent her to knock on doors. And at every door she found the same thing: loss, and people still living inside it. The grief she thought was hers alone turned out to be something the whole human family has always carried together. Not small, because others share it. Not less real, because you're not alone. But perhaps a little less isolating, a little less like a room with no way out. At the bottom of grief, if you can stay with it long enough, what sometimes appears is not emptiness. It's connection, the tie that was never fully cut. You don't need to see that today. Today it's enough to simply let yourself grieve, without apology, without a deadline. Thank you for spending this time here. Wherever you are in your sorrow, I hope it becomes not something that breaks you, but something that in time deepens you. The road won't be straight, but then it never is, for anyone walking a human life. May you find, as Kisa Gotami did, that the very thing you carried alone becomes the lamp you one day hold out to someone else standing in the dark. Some of you will be that someone else sooner than you expect. A friend will call, a neighbor will fall silent in a way you recognize, and without quite knowing how, you will know exactly what to sit beside. May today's words quietly take root within you. One story a day. In a week your words will change. In a month your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.